Mayor Richard Berry has called the shooting of James Boyd and the subsequent protest a game changer, but whether there will be substantive change in the Albuquerque Police Department remains unclear at this point. The mayor wants the Department of Justice to fast-track its review of the city's police force, as well as set up a system to track and monitor APD's progress. Also at issue is this curriculum used to train many of these officers. It emphasizes using guns rather than other tools like tasers. The State Law Enforcement Academy now has adopted a new curriculum that officials say could reduce police shootings by training cadets to shy away from using deadly force. But some critics say that will be confusing to cadets who only have a GED or a high school education. We're going to get into that and a lot more. So joining us to discuss this evolving story is a line regular, Rob Nikolewski, with the New Mexico Watchdog and the Capitol Report. Also returning to the line table, another regular, Laura Sanchez, environmental and civil rights attorney, who's also with the New Mexico Green Chamber of Commerce. We welcome back to the line table attorney Sophie Martin, who also teaches marketing communications with UNM's Anderson School of Management. And another line regular here is Tom Garrity of the Garrity Group. Tom, you were quoted this week in Albuquerque Business First in a terrific piece about what the city could be doing better, particularly our police department and the mayor's office on communicating with the greater public about this. A little time's gone by now since you wrote that. You know, the protest on Sunday night, we've had the mayor come out at least 2 or 3 times this week already. Where do we sit now on where the city sits on where this all is from a PR standpoint?
Well, from a PR standpoint, Dan Mayfield with Albuquerque Business First, I think, did a really good job on that particular story. You know, when you look at where the city is now, you know, I think they've done a good job of not completely stopping the bleeding, but you know, really applying a tourniquet just to try and stop the bad flow or non-flow of information. You know, the news conference that was held earlier this week, the latest one, I think was a good opportunity for the mayor to really show some leadership. I mean, you know, he went out, he assigned specific tasks to the legislature, to the city councilor, to all of us as citizens. The faux pas there was, you know, the lack of preparedness with regards to some of the reports that the reporters had mentioned. So, you know, I think that things are moving forward. You know, their Twitter account, Facebook account, I believe, around back online. And so there is that outbound communication, which had just been largely vacant for a solid 4 days.
And that's an eternity, isn't it, in a situation like this? 4 days.
Yeah. When you look at, you know, 140 characters takes on a whole new meaning. You know, when people are wanting information right now, as far as, you know, what do you do if, you know, Central is closed down? What do you do if people are on the interstate stopping traffic?
That's right.
So, you know, huge missed opportunity, but I think they've stopped the bleeding, but they haven't started to turn that ship of perception yet.
Sure, fair enough. Part of that perception, Rob Nikolewski, glad you're here, by the way, is the mayor coming straight out and saying he would like to see the report from the Department of Justice come out sooner than later so he can start making his own changes. What did you make of that? I've not heard that before.
Well, what I make of it is this is they're in major damage control mode right now. And the other thing that I saw from a political standpoint was that they're maybe thinking that they want to get out ahead of this thing, thinking that the DOJ report might come out very negative to them, so they want to be able to jump out in front on that. I think the other issue here too, and it's I mean, there's certainly a lot of concern about the too much use of force by the police, but also I think the other issue too is what do we do with mentally ill people? James Boyd had a history of mental illness. He had a history of violence. He punched and broke a police officer's nose. He cut someone in the face with a box cutter. And here was a guy who's a homeless guy with some mental issues. I think this brings up to a larger issue, not just in Albuquerque, but also across the country. What do we do with mentally ill people? In the last 30 or 40 years, there's been there was an initiation to have more people, if they didn't want to go into treatment, they didn't have to go into treatment. Right. I think now we've got a real crisis on our hands.
Interesting. Sounds echoes of what Governor Martinez, Sophie, is trying to do with CYFD, about not letting things hang out there and jumping on things early. It's interesting.
To be clear, CYFD is that is largely an issue with children, and here we are talking about mentally ill adults for the most part. I mean, there can be some crossover, but the two sort of distinct issues. One thing that I think is worth noting, at this point, the city is telling us 27% of beat cops, or cops on the street, I should say, have training, specialized training in how to work with people on the street who have a mental illness, and the commitment here to train 100% of the police force. I think that consistency is really important. It's one of the things that concerns me about the change in training for new police officers. We don't want to see different methodologies on the street. We want to see a consistent and positive, well-managed, well-performed form of policing out there. We don't want our newest cops doing something very different from how our more experienced cops are working. And I think that's true both in mental illness training and in the training overall.
Sure, that makes sense. Interesting, Sophie mentioned, and Rob as well, the 75-bed facility out in the West Side that the West Side Chamber is trying to push. In the context of the mayor has asked for more money for APD and for economic development, I thought there was an interesting opportunity in that very same moment to ask for more money for mental health services in this city. I thought there was a beautiful opportunity missed there. Would you agree with that? Was that the time to talk about these kind of things?
I'm not sure that he would have been the right person to talk about that. I mean, I think it's important for a lot of other people looking at this and trying to find long-term solutions that make sense to ask for more funding. I think that's a big part of the exacerbation of this issue. I'm not sure that that would have been the right role for the mayor or folks that are trying to address the actions of the police to sort of insert that advocacy at that point from them. It's certainly worth having a conversation about afterwards with the mayor and the city, and I think that's an appropriate approach. But I don't think anybody feels good about what's happened over the last few weeks about this. And I lived in LA for 3 years while I was in law school, and was just really familiar with the way that the police force there was seen. And this was all sort of post Rodney King, post riots, and there was still a specter of years and years later, 15 years later, of the LAPD being using too much force, and there was just everything that happened over the weekend was just really close to that for me.
Sure.
And I think it makes a lot of people start to really be concerned about what's happening in our city.
Makes
It's
sense.
not good.
Let's go to training here for a sec, Tom. Interesting how this has come to light again. We have not had any changes significant. Sophie mentioned 2003. That was a long time ago. And this idea of a reactive control model. It's a very pithy phrase where basically means if you feel threatened as an officer, just pull the gun out. We'll see how it goes from there. Now with the new training, the idea is to have a lot of other options. Is that a confidence builder for the community as well, that kind of an idea?
Well, I think any changes right now, if they can be explained, I think will help to build
If they can be
confidence.
explained.
If they can be explained.
Right.
But changes just for the sake of, okay, this happened, so we're going to do this now.
Right.
Without any explanation is just, that's politicizing the issue even more.
Let me ask you, in the interest of time, what did you make of the reaction that somehow these new training techniques would be too confusing, as I mentioned in our setup, if you have just a GED or not much education further beyond that? I mean, I heard a low expectation comment there about
Yeah.
our people. How did that hit you?
When you look at how do you make things that are palatable for the entire population, not just for officers who have to find a way to implement them, but when you look at the average reading rate of New Mexico residents is maybe about second grade, third grade level, that should really be our guide as far as the level of explanation that we need to be able to provide. That officers need to be able to communicate and communicate effectively.
Right. Rob, on that same subject about training being too difficult in this change, is that something the community should expect or accept? That it's too difficult, we should just stay the same? I mean, something bizarre here.
My impression is that there needs to be a better way to ferret out problem police officers. There were two involved in this Boyd shooting who had some background, that had some problems in their background. I think that's probably a larger issue. If you've got an officer who has a history of excessive force, there needs to be a better structure to weed those people out. That's what I would say.
Laura, the same thing about training. What's effective here in your view?
Well, I mean, back to the issue about the lowered expectations. I think that's just a recipe for disaster. We can't accept that we need to change the training because most of the people coming in are GED or not even high school graduates, and that that our education system is that low. I mean, everybody has to take some responsibility, including the police department, in the training to make sure we're bringing people's skill levels up. I mean, it really frightens me to think that somebody who is not able to read some basic instructions is now carrying a gun and expected to make decisions where clearly they're emotive decisions, and maybe not intellectual thinking decisions. You have to at least be able to play something out a few steps ahead in a situation like the Boyd shooting or other difficult situations, and that takes some level of intellectual capacity. I don't think I think it's a terrible disservice to the community to say we can't implement, tougher training because we have officers that can't handle that. I mean, give them some credit and give them the training and tools that they need to actually do the job. That's what the community needs, and that's what those officers need. You can't just say we can't do anything too complicated here.
Yeah, well said there. Coming up, we get an update on the evolving crisis in Ukraine and Crimea from the president of the Albuquerque International Association.